still remember the soft amber light above the dinner spread, the way my father raised his glass and toasted my younger sister for her big promotion. Everyone clapped, laughed. Someone even turned to me and asked, "Oh, Lily, you're still at that old job, right?" I smiled, nodded politely. No one noticed how tightly I was gripping my napkin under the table. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just took another bite of cake, another sip of wine, and started paying attention. They thought my silence meant I was weak, but what they didn't know was that I'd already started rearranging the table, one forgotten chair at a time. The office was silent except for the soft hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of old wood as it settled into night. The overhead lights had long since dimmed, leaving only the bluish glow of my computer screen to reflect against the window pane. Outside, Boston was winding down, a city I loved for its quiet after the noise. I wrapped my hands around a paper cup of now-cold coffee, the bitterness of it lingering more in memory than taste. There was a sharpness in the air, the kind that clings to your skin late in the evening, when everyone else has gone home and you're still trying to outrun something that no longer chases. I was clearing out my inbox, mindless, necessary work, when a message popped up on Slack. "Happy early birthday to your mom, 70, right? That's such a beautiful milestone." It was from Andrew in marketing, kind, well-meaning Andrew, who somehow remembered my mother's name after hearing it once in the break room. I blinked at the screen. 70? I hadn't forgotten, of course. I had her birthday written down on the wall calendar in my apartment, circled in green ink like I did every year. But something about the way he said it, "Happy early birthday," made me feel like I'd missed something. I typed a polite thank you, closed the message, and opened Facebook. I rarely used it, mostly to check on old high school friends or tag photos from work events. But tonight, some part of me felt pulled there, like when you reach for an old sweater on a cold day. Not because it's fashionable, but because you hope it still fits. And there it was, a banner image tastefully designed. Celebrating 70 years of Patricia Langford. Join us for an afternoon by the lake. It had been posted by Judith, my sister. The guest list was long, cousins I hadn't seen since my father's funeral, neighbors from childhood. Even my mother's college roommate from Arizona had RSVP'd, but not me. I scrolled slowly past the comments, past the laughing emojis, the hearts, the cheerful, can't wait messages from people who hadn't spoken my name aloud in years. I searched for any mention of mine. A tag. A Lily will be there too. A comment. Nothing. The cursor blinked on the screen like a pulse. Mine, maybe. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of it press into my chest. Not sharp, but dull, familiar. The way old injuries ache when it rains. Did they forget, or did I stop reminding them I was part of this family? That thought lingered longer than I expected. It wasn't angry, just tired. Like a question you've asked 1,000 times and only now realize may never be answered. I closed the laptop gently. The sound of it clicking shut echoed too loudly in the quiet room. I let my fingers rest on the lid a moment longer than needed. Somewhere, a cleaning cart rolled down the hallway. Life was going on, cleaning up, closing out, moving forward. I looked again at the banner in my mind. Celebrating 70 years of Patricia Langford. A life of kindness, of memory, of presence, and somehow, in the celebration of that life, they'd carved me out. I stood, the chill from the window brushing against my arms. And then, in the stillness, I realized something. Maybe I didn't want an invitation. Maybe I wanted to be remembered without needing one. And just like that, the silence felt heavier than the hurt. Not loud, just final. The coffee had gone completely cold, so had the chair beneath me, but I sat there a little longer, staring into the screen's fading glow until my reflection blurred back into just another shadow in the glass. The smell of old paper and faint lavender dusted the air as I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. It creaked the way it always had, protesting age and memory. The album was where I remembered leaving it, second layer down, tucked beneath my father's navy wool scarf and a stack of Christmas cards no one had read in years. I lifted it carefully, as if afraid the pages might crumble beneath my fingers. Its faux leather cover had cracked along the spine, and the plastic overlays had begun to yellow, like time itself had pressed its fingerprint into each frame. I carried it to the window seat, the afternoon light angling through gauzy curtains. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a gentle rhythm, slow and sure, anchoring me to something I couldn't name. The first photo was from a picnic. I was maybe 8, barefoot, smiling shyly at the edge of the frame. Judith stood in the center, her arms thrown around our parents, eyes shining toward the camera. My younger brother Daniel sat in front with a melting popsicle in hand, his cheeks flushed with summer. And me? I was behind a tree, not completely hidden, but not quite in focus either. I turned the page. Christmas, 1992. Everyone gathered around the piano. Mom playing carols, Dad holding a glass of eggnog, Judith laughing with her boyfriend, and me, half cropped out of the left-hand corner. Only the sleeve of my green sweater and a hint of my braid made the final cut. It was a pattern I'd never fully noticed before. I was there, always there, just not centered, not held, not seen. Some pages included captions in my mother's handwriting, elegant, looping letters, Judith's piano recital, Daniel's first school play. The space under my pictures was often blank, as if the memory was there but unnamed, unspoken. I don't think anyone meant to do it, at least not at first. But when you're placed at the edge long enough, you learn not to step into the center. You learn to shrink yourself politely, to smile from the margins, to applaud without expecting applause in return. A photo from my 13th birthday caught my breath. I'd forgotten we'd even taken one. It was in the backyard, cake on a picnic table, me in a denim vest I thought was terribly fashionable. The candles were lit, but everyone looked away. My father was distracted by a call. Judith was whispering to someone off frame, only my mother watched me, one hand gently on my back. It was a quiet touch, the kind that didn't show up in pictures but stayed with you nonetheless. I traced that spot on the photo with my thumb, that fleeting kindness, that anchor. Was I left out, or did I learn to step aside before anyone asked me to? The pages grew thinner near the end. Fewer photos, more digital years. By then, I'd already moved to Boston. The last image was from a Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Everyone around the table, holding glasses for a toast. My name had been signed on the pie box I shipped from New England. It sat unopened on the counter behind them. The room had changed, the wallpaper updated, the faces a little older, but the absence was consistent. I closed the album slowly, letting the air settle again. Dust particles floated in the sunlight, dancing like ghosts in quiet celebration. And I thought, maybe being left out of the picture isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's a rehearsal for being forgotten. The scent of jasmine always finds me when I'm not looking for it. It's rarely from the source, never the tea itself, but from a candle in a shop window, a stranger's perfume on the elevator, or the faint trace of something forgotten and warm tucked in the lining of an old scarf. And when it does find me, it brings me back to that night. I was 10, maybe 11, the age when friendships mattered more than logic and the world could tilt on a single unanswered invitation. Melissa Anderson had passed out birthday cards in class that morning, glittery, store-bought things with curling ribbon tape, and I hadn't received one. Not by mistake. I knew, the way kids know. That afternoon, I came home quiet, too quiet. I told Mom it was nothing, but she could always read the spaces between my words. She let me sit on the back steps in silence for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. Then she disappeared into the kitchen. I thought she was just making dinner, but half an hour later, she came back out with 2 teacups on a tray and a folded paper napkin under a little chocolate cupcake. She wore the red cardigan she only brought out for December, and her hair was clipped back with a silver barrette I hadn't seen in months. Something about it made her look younger, like she'd borrowed herself from a memory. "I figured we could throw our own party," she said, setting the tray on the old wooden table outside. "Just us." I don't remember what I said. I only remember the jasmine. It floated up from the steam of the cups, floral and gentle. I wrapped my hands around the mug, the warmth of it reaching into my chest the way kindness does when you've braced for absence. We wore paper crowns she made from leftover wrapping paper and tape. Mine slipped down over my eyes every few minutes. We laughed each time like it was the first. There were no photos, no evidence, but it's one of the clearest nights of my life. Later, as the wind picked up and we moved inside, she said something I've never quite forgotten. "You're special in your own way, Lily," she murmured, brushing hair from my cheek. "Even if other people don't see it yet, I do, always." She didn't promise things would change at school. She didn't criticize Melissa or ask for details. She just gave me her time, and that particular kind of stillness only a mother can give, the kind that says, "You don't have to earn this." Sometimes I wonder if she remembers that night, if that memory still lives somewhere behind the distracted pauses in our recent phone calls, or has it been folded away like the silver barrette or the cardigan with the loose threads? What happens when the one person who once saw you begins to forget where to look? The jasmine scent faded from the cup long ago, but on nights when the air is cool and the city quiets, I pour myself a cup and sit by the window. Not to relive it exactly, but to remember how it felt to be seen. Not for achievements or appearances or obligations, just seen. The heater in my car gave off that faint metallic scent it always did in the first few minutes, like warm dust and old wires remembering how to breathe. I'd pulled into the parking garage after a late client dinner, the kind where no one finishes their wine and everyone pretends the contract isn't already decided. The city above me had quieted into its winter hush. I like those still hours usually, but tonight my hands wouldn't stop tightening around the steering wheel. I wasn't ready to go upstairs. That's when I saw him, Daniel, walking with that hesitant pace like someone trying to decide if they should keep going or turn back. He was bundled in his coat, collar turned up, hands deep in his pockets. I rolled down the window halfway. "Hey," I said, "need a ride?" He looked surprised. "Yeah, actually, if you're heading toward the red line." "Hop in," I replied, unlocking the door. He settled into the passenger seat with a polite smile and a gust of cold air. For a moment, we said nothing. Just the soft hum of the heater, the occasional thud of a car door closing elsewhere in the structure. We were acquaintances mostly, connected by circumstance. My sister Judith's boyfriend. A decent guy from what I'd seen, smart, quiet, thoughtful in the meetings we'd accidentally shared at work. "You okay?" he asked eventually. "You seem tense." I laughed once without humor. "Let's just say I'm beginning to suspect my own family forgot to tell me my mother's birthday party is this weekend." He turned toward me slowly. "You didn't know?" I shook my head, staring out at the concrete wall ahead. I found out from a coworker, on Facebook. Not exactly the warm glow of family connection. He was quiet for a long beat. Then he said, "Lily, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I think you need to know. Judith, she didn't want you there." The air in the car shifted like someone had cracked a window and let in something too sharp. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already did. "She told your parents you'd declined, said you were too busy, that it would just cause stress if you tried to make it last minute. She was pretty firm about it. At the planning meeting, she even brought a finalized guest list. You weren't on it." Planning meeting finalized. I gripped the wheel again, not to drive, just to feel something stable. My heart wasn't racing, not exactly. It was slower than that, like a quiet realization that seeps into the corners before it speaks aloud. "She didn't tell you?" he asked, almost gently. "No," I said. "She didn't." Daniel exhaled, his breath fogging the window. "I shouldn't be in the middle of this, I know that, but it didn't feel right to stay quiet." I appreciated that more than I could say, and yet the ache wasn't rage. It wasn't even surprise. It was the ache of something I'd already suspected being spoken aloud, made real. What do you do when the truth confirms what you'd hoped was only your imagination? We sat in silence for another minute. The city lights filtered through the windshield in long stripes as a car passed behind us. The moment felt suspended, as though the world outside had paused for us to catch up. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally. He nodded, then opened the door. "Take care, Lily." And as he disappeared into the stairwell, I sat alone in the cooling car, watching the condensation fade from the glass, just like trust, once breathed upon, slowly vanishing without noise. The zipper made a soft, deliberate sound as I closed the suitcase, teeth sliding together like the edges of a sealed letter. In the stillness of my apartment, everything felt overly precise. The neatly folded clothes, the pale blue dress draped over the back of the chair, the travel-sized toiletries lined up like soldiers waiting for deployment. I had never packed so carefully for a family gathering. The dress was new, simple, elegantly cut with a high neckline and a hem that brushed the knee just right. Not too formal, not too plain. The kind of dress that said, I am doing well, and I came because I chose to. It wasn't about making an impression. It was about reclaiming presence. Still, I held it against myself in the mirror, adjusting the collar slightly. My reflection blinked back, unsure. The woman in the glass looked polished but tired. Not from age, not even from work, but from a long history of tiptoeing around what was never quite said aloud. On the nightstand sat a smaller box, gift-wrapped in textured cream paper, tied with soft green ribbon. Inside was an antique brooch I'd found at a shop tucked away in Cambridge, a delicate gold leaf inlaid with an emerald stone, not flashy, but unmistakably familiar. It was nearly identical to the one I remembered from my grandmother's jewelry box, the one my mother used to wear in church until it disappeared sometime in my teens. When I saw it in the store, I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to ask whether she'd remember. Some things don't leave a person, they just wait to be given back. The flight was booked, first class, an extravagance perhaps, but this trip felt too layered for cramped knees and overhead compartments. I'd reserved a room at a small inn near the lake, not far from the old family home. Staying with them wasn't an option. Not now. I needed space. Neutral ground. Somewhere to retreat if memory turned against me. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my phone. Judith's name was still pinned near the top of my message list, though we hadn't exchanged anything meaningful in months. I'd typed and erased a dozen versions of the same note over the past few days. I'm coming, don't worry, I won't cause a scene. Tell Mom I remember. Tell her I still want to see her. But the screen remained blank. Was silence the only language we understood now, or was it the only one we were willing to speak? I closed the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. Outside the window, the city glowed in quiet confidence. People rushing home with groceries, laughter echoing from someone's open balcony. Lives moving forward, families built from weekend rituals and shared calendars. I wondered briefly if anyone downstairs had ever missed an invitation from their own mother. The lamp beside the bed cast a soft halo against the wall, warm and forgiving. I let it light my stillness, not with anger, but with clarity. I wasn't returning to prove anything. I wasn't chasing recognition or apology. I was returning because there were still pieces of myself in that house, tucked in the corners of photographs, hidden in drawers, buried in the way my name used to sound when Mom said it softly. And sometimes you go back not for answers, but simply to remind the air that you were once part of it. The dress hung beside the door, the gift resting beneath it like a quiet offering. Neither asked for permission. Neither begged for praise. They would speak, if needed, softly, surely, without shame. The gravel crunched under my shoes in that soft, uncertain way it always did on the path to my parents' lake house. I hadn't walked it in years, yet my feet remembered the rhythm. The slight dip near the hydrangeas, the uneven stones past the cedar tree that used to lean left like it, too, was tired of standing straight. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden hour that photographers chase and poets try to explain. Sunlight filtered through the branches overhead, casting moving shadows on the wooden porch. The old wind chimes, brass and glass, sang gently in the breeze, same as they always had. For a moment, I let the memory of their sound wash over me, carrying me back to summers of bare feet and citronella candles. I held the gift in both hands. The ribbon had loosened slightly during the drive, and I paused to retie it, more out of instinct than perfectionism. The paper was cream-colored linen with soft green edging, the kind of wrap that says, I thought about this. And I had. I climbed the steps slowly. The porch boards creaked, more brittle than before. Through the open windows, I heard music. Big band jazz, Mom's favorite. Laughter drifted out in layered waves. I recognized voices. Uncle Ray's booming chuckle, my cousin Claire's breathy giggle, the sound of togetherness. I adjusted the sleeves of my dress and stepped toward the open door. That's when I saw him. My father. He stood like a sentry just inside, holding a clipboard as though this were a corporate gala instead of his wife's birthday. His face didn't change when he saw me. No flicker of welcome or surprise. Just a slow narrowing of the eyes, as though he were trying to remember if he'd ordered something that hadn't yet arrived. "Hi, Dad," I said, offering a small smile. He didn't return it. His gaze drifted to the gift in my hands, then back to my face. "You're not on the list," he said flatly. The words didn't sting right away. They sat there suspended as if waiting for me to decide how deeply they would cut. I blinked. I spoke to Mom. She said she'd like me to come. He looked down at the clipboard again, then exhaled slowly through his nose. "The guest list was finalized weeks ago. This is a private event, Lily, for people who've stayed part of this family." The way he said this family, as if it were a club I'd allowed my membership to lapse from. I swallowed, the weight of the gift growing heavier in my arms. Behind him, I could see movement. Judith in a coral dress, setting a drink down, smiling at someone out of frame. She hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe she had, and didn't look. "I flew in for this," I said, softer than I intended. "I just want to wish Mom a happy birthday." His jaw tightened. This isn't the time. A beat passed. Then another. "Is there ever a right time to be seen again by people who've already replaced you?" I nodded slowly. "I understand." I extended the gift toward him. He hesitated, then took it, grudgingly like I'd handed him an obligation. "Please give this to her," I said. "Tell her I remember." Then, without waiting for acknowledgement, I turned and walked back down the steps. The chimes stirred again as I passed, their sound catching briefly in the air. Half bell, half breath. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew where I stood now. Not inside, not invited, not forgotten exactly, but no longer expected. As I reached the gravel path again, the sun dipped behind a cloud, and for a moment, the shadow of the porch stretched long behind me, reaching but never quite touching my heels. The moment I stepped inside through the side entrance, the scent of citrus and white lilies hit me like a memory I hadn't prepared for. It was the exact same fragrance Mom used to wear for Sunday services. I paused under the arch of balloon garlands, letting the familiarity settle over me like a fragile shawl. The banquet room was warm with voices, clinking glassware, and the faint hum of a saxophone trio tucked in the far corner. Light danced across the surface of wine glasses, and someone laughed too loudly near the punch bowl. From here, the gathering looked effortless, polished, like a family untouched by fracture. I could see her, my mother, seated at the head table in a lavender dress, her silver hair pinned neatly, her shoulders still regal despite the passage of time. She looked radiant. Tired, perhaps, but radiant. Her smile was small and polite, the kind she reserved for guests rather than family. Daniel walked beside me, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken much since the door. There wasn't much to say. This wasn't about fixing anything, it was about standing still long enough to be counted. He cleared his throat gently. I watched his jaw tighten with resolve as he stepped forward into the space between tables, raising his voice just enough to travel. "Everyone," he began. "If I could just take a moment." Voices dimmed. Forks paused mid-air. "I'd like to introduce someone. A lot of you know her, but some of you may not recognize her right away. This is Lily, Patricia's daughter, and—" He glanced briefly at me. "Also my direct superior at Vertex." Then he said it, clearly, calmly, "My boss." The word landed like a glass slipping quietly from someone's hand and tapping a plate on the way down, not shattering, just interrupting. There was a beat, then two, and then stillness. I watched the slow turn of heads, the recalibration of assumptions ripple through the room. It wasn't anger I saw, or even surprise. It was a quiet processing. as if they had to match the version of me they'd stored away, some distant, dismissive daughter, with the woman now standing before them, poised and dressed with intention. My mother's head turned last. Her eyes met mine. At first confusion, then something else, softer, a flicker of warmth, of recognition. "Lily?" she said, just above a whisper. "You came." I felt the breath I hadn't realized I was holding finally release. Judith moved quickly through the crowd, her heels barely making a sound on the carpet. Her smile was brittle, her voice too bright. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a second?" "Later," he replied quietly. This needed to be said. I didn't move toward my mother, not yet. I let the moment settle, let the air adjust around my presence. How many times had my name been left out of conversations, unspoken, uninvited, until silence itself began to rewrite who I was? Now in this room, with nothing more than a name and a truth, I had been returned to the center. Not demanded, not performed, just reclaimed. Somewhere nearby, a server set down a tray too quickly. A spoon fell against porcelain. It echoed briefly, then vanished. And in that quiet, I stood still. No longer a guest, no longer forgotten. Simply a daughter, called by name in the room where I had not been expected, and yet still belonged. There's a certain way her hands moved when she was nervous. Fingers brushing the edge of her napkin, then folding it again, even when it was already folded. I remembered it from my childhood, at school meetings or choir recitals. Tonight, at her birthday table, that same quiet motion returned. The lavender of her dress deepened under the warm lights. Her silver earrings caught a glint from the chandelier, but her face was turned down, focused on the small box now resting in her lap. "I brought something," I said softly, careful not to speak over the music or the murmurs still floating around us. "For you." Her fingers hovered over the ribbon, then untied it delicately, as if the gift might vanish if opened too quickly. The paper gave a gentle whisper as it fell away. Inside, nestled in soft ivory cloth, was the brooch. Gold-leafed edges, curling gently like a sprig pressed between old book pages. At the center, a single emerald stone, deep green, oval cut, the kind that catches light from the corner of the eye but keeps its depth hidden until you really look. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her fingers traced the outline with reverence, then paused at the pin clasp, turning it carefully over. The room faded. The music blurred. Even the warmth of others' eyes dimmed beside the intensity of that silence. Then she looked up at me and smiled. Not the polite hostess smile, not the smile reserved for church or photos. This one was smaller, older, wiser. The smile that once met me in the kitchen after a bad day of middle school or beside my bed when I was sick and couldn't sleep. "I thought this was lost," she whispered, voice catching. "Your grandmother gave it to me before we moved to the lake house. I used to wear it on Easter, and you—" Her voice broke slightly and she pressed her fingers to her lips. "And I remembered," I said. "You showed it to me when I was 10. You said it made you feel like yourself." A tear slipped down her cheek. Not theatrical, not performative, just honest. She reached across the table, hand finding mine, cool and soft and trembling slightly. "All this time?" she murmured. "You remembered." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my own throat. Had she forgotten me? Or had someone else convinced her I was no longer worth remembering? That question hovered, unspoken, as she picked up the brooch and pinned it, carefully, just above her heart. The emerald caught the chandelier's glow, casting a soft green shimmer onto her skin. She didn't need to say anything else. The brooch spoke for both of us. Of memory, of forgiveness, and of a bond that, though frayed and tangled by silence, had never fully unraveled. That night, for the first time in a very long while, I felt like a daughter again. Not the forgotten one, not the distant one, just hers. And under the weight of that tiny jewel, she seemed to sit taller, like something long misplaced had finally returned home. The guest room smelled faintly of cedar and old linen, like time had folded itself into the corners and waited patiently. The lamp on the nightstand glowed amber against the wood-paneled walls, casting soft shadows that stretched across the floorboards. Outside, the lake lapped gently against the dock in a rhythm I remembered from childhood. Comforting, steady, unchanged. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my dress from earlier when she knocked once and stepped in. No makeup now, her hair let down in soft waves, robe pulled close against the cool of evening. "I thought you might still be awake," she said, almost sheepishly. "I was just thinking," I replied. She didn't sit. Instead, she walked slowly to the tall dresser in the corner, the one that had belonged to her mother, the one we weren't allowed to touch growing up. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a box I hadn't seen in years. Worn blue velvet, the edges faded, one corner slightly torn. She carried it over, set it on the bed between us, and opened it. Inside were old letters, dozens of them, some yellowed at the folds, others still neatly sealed. And near the top, folded into the familiar creases of childhood earnestness, was one addressed in my own handwriting. To Mom, don't read until I'm grown up. I blinked, stunned. I had forgotten I ever wrote it. She held it with both hands like it might dissolve if not treated gently. "You were 12, she said. "You'd had a fight with Judith and locked yourself in your room for hours. That night, you slipped this under my door." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. I watched her eyes scan the lines, words I could only vaguely recall writing. Something about feeling invisible. About how I hoped when I was older she'd still know the real me, that I wouldn't disappear just because I was quiet. "I never forgot this," she whispered. "I've kept it here. Always." I leaned forward, my hand brushing the corner of the paper. The ink had faded slightly, but the pressure of each word was still there, etched with the certainty only a child can hold. "So why?" I began, but let the words trail off. Why the distance? Why the unanswered calls? Why did I feel erased, year by year? She exhaled slowly. "I never meant to let you drift so far. Judith always had a way of filling the room, and I was tired. I started letting her manage things, thinking she just wanted to help." Her voice faltered. I didn't see how she was shaping the story, not until too late. I sat in silence, letting her words settle around us. Was it really forgetting or just not knowing what to hold on to? She reached over, placed the letter back into the box, and closed it gently. "I never locked this drawer," she said. "Not once. I just didn't know how to open it again." There was no apology in her voice, no dramatic plea, just truth, quiet, weathered, and worn in the way love often is after decades of small misunderstandings. We didn't speak again for a while. We just sat there side by side, the velvet box between us like a bridge made of memory. And I realized sometimes healing doesn't begin with words. It begins when someone shows you they never let go, even when you thought they did. And in the silence of that room, the drawer stayed open. The scent of warm coffee and faint perfume clung to the early morning air in the terminal. I stood by the arrival gate at Logan, holding a paper cup in both hands, feeling the quiet thrum of anticipation in my chest. Travelers streamed past, pulling suitcases behind them like trailing punctuation, their faces half awake, half somewhere else. Then I saw her. She moved slowly, but with purpose. Her coat was buttoned all the way up, even though spring had already begun to soften the air. The scarf I'd mailed her last Christmas, dusty rose with a pale gray trim, was knotted at her throat. Her eyes scanned the crowd with the careful focus of someone searching for more than just a familiar face. And then they landed on me. We didn't rush. We just walked toward each other until we met in the middle, and I wrapped my arms around her, careful not to squeeze too tight. She was smaller than I remembered, but still steady. For the first time in decades, I thought, she's not visiting out of obligation or to check something off a list. She came because she wanted to see me. Really see me. At the cafe near my apartment, we sat by the window and watched the city stir to life. She took her coffee with cream and honey. No sugar, never had, and asked questions in that soft, meandering way that wasn't about answers so much as understanding. "How often do you walk here?" she asked, nodding toward the Charles River below. Almost every evening, I said. It clears my mind. Later, I took her along the river path, our footsteps slow and mostly in silence. The breeze lifted the edges of her scarf, and at one point she stopped to watch a pair of rowers glide past. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. I glanced at her, trying to memorize the moment. The way the sun touched her cheekbones, the way she stood, still upright, still carrying years with a kind of grace that didn't ask to be admired. "You built a life," she added quietly, almost to herself, "and I didn't know how to be part of it." We paused on a footbridge, the water below shimmering like pressed glass. I slipped my arm through hers, not to lead, not to steady, but simply to connect. Do we become strangers because we drift or because we stop reaching? That night, back in my apartment, I brought out the photo albums she hadn't seen before. The ones that held no childhood, no birthdays, no Christmas mornings. Just the quiet progress of adulthood. Colleagues, conferences, my first office, my favorite bookstore. She studied each one with interest, asking questions, smiling at details. "You've always been so private," she said. "I had to be," I replied, "but not anymore." She stayed 4 days. We didn't talk about Judith or the party or who said what, when. Some truths didn't need repeating. Some reconciliations aren't spoken. They're walked quietly beside riverbanks. On the morning of her flight home, I handed her a small pouch. Inside, a framed photo of the two of us by the Charles, arms looped, her brooch catching the sunlight. She held it close for a moment, then tucked it into her carry-on. "I'm keeping this in my top drawer," she said. "The one that was never locked." And as I stood watching her pass through security, blending into the rhythm of departing lives, I didn't feel grief or regret. I felt arrival, not hers, mine. And in the hush that followed, I heard the echo of something old becoming whole again, quiet, complete, and finally returned. Sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes. Lily didn't shout or slam doors. She didn't seek revenge in the loud, dramatic ways we often see. Instead, she chose to return with grace, to speak the truth softly and to remember what mattered: connection, memory, and presence. This story reminds us that dignity doesn't require permission, that even when others forget your place in the family, you can still carry love forward. The most powerful kind of reclamation often happens not through confrontation, but through presence, showing up with an open heart, even when it's been broken. Many of us know what it's like to be overlooked, to sit at holidays feeling more like a guest than a kin. But Lily's story offers a kind of quiet redemption. That healing doesn't always mean things go back to how they were. Sometimes, healing means finally being seen for who you've become. Whether you're a mother, daughter, sibling, or simply someone who has loved in silence, this story is for you. Thank you for spending this time with Lily's story. If it touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you've loved, lost, or hope to reconnect with, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today. If you'd like more stories that honor quiet strength, life after estrangement, and the dignity of second chances, please consider subscribing. Share this story with someone who might need it. And above all, remember, it's never too late to open a drawer, make a call, or say, "I remember you. We're glad you're here."